Hi, JJ. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having us here. I'm Inga, and today we're going to talk about property management. So I'm going to, I guess, give you a little intro about me. In my past life, I am a medical speech pathologist, and my specialty is swallowing disorders. I got into real estate in about 2003 with vacation rentals in the Poconos. Lots of lessons learned there. As they say, if only I knew then what I know now, definitely would have been a different story, but learned from there and moved on to multifamily properties in Connecticut. And we started off, I guess, managing our own properties at first, and then started managing for a friend and went to grow from there. And Idani Management was born. And now we're up to about 200 units that we manage in Connecticut. And I was able to quit my job. And now I do the property management full time. And I'm also the I in Mears Group, if you guys know Mark. He's the M and I'm the I. So we're also focusing on lending, but my major portion is the property management, and Mark does the lending. But as we're partners and help each other. And Craig.
Hi everyone, my name is Craig Bellot. I'm partners with Inga on the property management side with Idoni Property Management. As Inga said, we're up to about 200 units right now. We're managing in Connecticut. A little bit about myself. I started as a computer programmer, website developer. I lived in New York City. And before I joined Fortune Builders, I was in the IT space, doing programming, and discovered a little book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And that's what kind of sparked my interest in real estate and said, okay, I gotta look into this a little deeper. So I actually started doing some vacation rentals, Airbnb, in my apartment in Queens. That's when I kind of caught the real estate bug and said, hey, listen, this might be, an interesting avenue to generate some extra income. And then, little by little things started happening. I met with Mark, I met with Inga. Mark was actually my coworker over at my daytime job, my 9 to 5. And that's how I met him. And through him, we met Inga. We joined Fortune Builders. And here we are. We started our property management company. And then, with Fortune Builders as well, learning how to, systemize our business, how to, really bring in the professionalism that's needed to take us, to the highest level. So I guess I'll get started with our presentation. And we're talking about property management. So I guess the first thing we want to discuss is why is property management important to an investor? And really, it's about maximizing your time, your finances, and your resources as an investor. So really what we want to do is move up our 80-20 leverage curve to get the highest reward, highest leverage for our time and money. So, we start out doing everything ourselves, personally, using our skills and our time to get everything done by brute force. But what we really want to do is move up that curve, from using our personal time and skills to being the actual investor and the CEO of our business and our life. So we want to move up and really leverage others as we learn in Fortune Builders to grow. And that means also our passive income properties. We need to leverage other people to help us to manage it so we can focus on the higher leverage activities, such as choosing our markets, choosing where to allocate our capital, and managing the managers. so that we're making the best use of our time. So some of the pros of property management, basically the number one thing they do is handling of the day-to-day management of your property. So you're not getting the middle of the night phone calls. The property manager handles all the phone calls for you, so you can kind of analyze your investment, making sure that you're investing in the right markets. They handle all the coordination of maintenance requests from the contractors and the tenants, the back and forth between that. Sometimes that can just eat up your time. Property managers handle the follow-up on rent collection. Sometimes tenants are a little bit late. They don't always prioritize paying rent. So, we have to kind of follow up and sometimes chase a little bit to make sure and train them to pay on time and keep paying on time. So as property managers, there's a lot of incentives, the carrots and the sticks that we use to make sure that tenants pay on time and make sure that we train them that paying on time is the right thing to do. And if you're late, you'll be charged a late fee, things like that, and other incentives as well as penalties if they don't pay on time. So just following up so that you, the investor, don't have to do that. Showing and filling vacancies, that's a big one. For rental properties, vacancy, both economic and physical vacancy, will be your number one cash flow killer. So you want to make sure that your property manager is doing everything in their power to make sure your vacancies are filled as quickly as possible. And that also includes screening the prospective residents, doing the background checks, the credit checks, the eviction checks, all of the screening that's needed to make sure that your tenant is a good person and they'll pay on time. Now, there's not always a foolproof method, but, being in the trenches over the years, a good property manager will be able to kind of weed out the good tenants from the bad tenants. And a bad tenant can cost you thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. So you really want to make sure you have a good property manager screening your prospective tenants. Another big time killer is mediating tenant conflicts. Now, we manage a lot of multifamily buildings, and tenants have disputes with other tenants, whether they're playing their music too loud, whether their dogs are barking, whether tenants are not cleaning up after their pets and there's poop in the yard, whatever it is, girlfriends and boyfriends, wives and husbands fighting and breaking stuff. There's always some conflict that can happen in between. So, you don't want to be the babysitter. You want your property manager to be the babysitter of your tenants and making sure that everything is handled unemotionally. You want to be firm but fair, but you want to have someone who's trained and professionally handles the situation without getting too emotional and making sure the rent is still collected at the end of the day. Some other pros of property management: confidentiality. Some owners, investors, they don't want their tenants to know where they live. They want to be totally removed from the property. They just want to collect their check at the end of the month, and that's it. So property management is a good way. When you have a manager in the middle, the tenants pay the property manager and the property manager pays you. You don't have to be exposed to your identity to the tenants. Asset protection is another one. The first line of protection usually is the property management company. If a tenant slips and falls, if a dog bites a tenant, if anything happens on the property, a good property manager will have a line of general liability and errors and omissions insurance. And, even before your homeowner's insurance gets touched, the property management company usually is the first line of defense there. That's an additional layer on top of your homeowner's insurance as well. So that's a good thing to have. Again, if you have a property manager, you don't even have to live in the state that you invest in. If investing in Texas or Florida is more profitable than investing in your home state, you have that ability to be able to invest without even living there. And you have a property manager who can help you find a property and invest in that property, because they deal with this day in and day out. They know which properties are profitable, which ones are not, what kind of rents you should expect. So that's really a good first line to be able to invest. If you talk to the property manager, sometimes you're talking to the agents, and yeah, they want to sell you the dream. They want to tell you, yeah, this, this property is good, but once they sell you that deal and the transaction is done, they're gone. You really want to talk to someone who is going to manage the property after the fact, and they'll let you know the truth. Okay, no, you can't charge $2,000 in rent for this apartment. It's more like $1,500, and they can, give you the real deal on what's going to happen with this property. So diversifying your rental portfolio, across the United States, that can be a good, using property managers in the markets you want to invest in, that could be a good way to diversify your portfolio. Another advantage of using property management, they do all your bookkeeping, all your accounting for you, so you don't have to do that at the end of the year. You get your 1099, you get your Excel spreadsheets every month and at the end of the year, so everything is in line there. Tenant evictions, you don't want to be handling, especially if you're new to it, you may not want to be handling that yourself. One mistake, one box not checked off, and that could cost you your whole case. The judge could throw it out and you have to start all over again with the case, wasting more time and money. So your evictions, you really want to use someone that's been through the process many times so they can make sure that you're getting value for the money and you actually get the tenant out at the end of the day. So that's just some of the pros of property management. Inga, you want to go over some of the cons of using property management?
Yes. Actually, I have one more pro that I just thought of. If you're investing out of a self-directed IRA, that you can invest in properties out of that, you have to have a property management company because you're not allowed to manage those yourself. So that's also a good investment strategy to utilize your self-directed IRA. But what are some of the cons of property management? Well, obviously nobody wants to work for free. So there is a cost associated to having a property manager. So sometimes your profit might not be as high if you're utilizing a property management company. However, are you willing to give up some of your profit to free up all of your time? So you really have to think of it in that respect. When you hand over the reins to a property management company, there is some loss of control because the day-to-day operations are handled by the manager and they make a lot of decisions. Usually the major decisions, they still run by you, but again, it's not all the decisions made by you, so you have to kind of cede some of the control. Additionally, if your property manager is not very experienced, they can mismanage your property. Sometimes maybe they let in a tenant that's not very good. They didn't do a proper background check, and they wind up living and not paying rent, or they are not really paying attention to the maintenance items that need to be handled, and you wind up with a big maintenance issue down the line. They can make certainly mistakes. For example, I know the whole country, and especially us in the Northeast here, we've had a lot of snow in February and a lot of freezing ice. So a lot of potential for lawsuits from falls and, making sure that the snow is cleared. And you're not getting a call from a fire marshal saying, I'm moving your tenants into a hotel and you're paying for it because you didn't clear the snow. That's a possibility. Another one, obviously, I would have to say is rare, but is possible, and we have heard of this happening, is the property manager kind of absconds with your rent. So they collect the rent from your property and you don't actually receive it. Hopefully that doesn't happen to you, but you have to make sure that you do your due diligence when you're selecting your property manager. But that's certainly something that could happen.
So we're going to go through some of the costs of property management out there these days. There are a few different pricing models used by property management companies. One, there's a flat fee model where a company would just charge, let's say between $69 and $99 per month. And that's just a flat fee while the contract is in force every month that you pay, and they'll handle the rent collection. They'll do some maintenance for you and manage the communication back and forth with the resident and vendors. The disadvantage of that is you pay that even if your property is vacant. Sometimes you do have turnover and tenant moves out, you'll still be paying that no matter what. Another model is kind of the industry standard where between 8 to 10% of rent is collected. 8 to 10% of rent collected is charged as the management fee. So if you have a $2,000 property, you're paying $200 per month on for the management of that. If the tenant leaves and you're in between tenants, and that percentage there'll be nothing paid because that's paid only on rent collected. Usually you have a lease up fee where the property management company is finding a new tenant, screening, doing the background checks, credit checks on a new tenant. And usually they'll charge anywhere between half a month to a month's rent to place that tenant. There are other fees possible as well during the contract term, not limited to upcharges on maintenance, lease renewal fees. It could be startup fees to start up the contract, cancellation fees if you terminate early. There also could be vacant apartment fees as well for them to go in and check. There could be inspection fees. And if you sell the property while you're in contract with them, I've also heard of fees to the property management company if you sell the property while under their contract. So each company has their different pricing model. You really have to go through the contract and see what all the extra fees are that they charge, and make sure you know exactly what you're getting into. So some questions on how to select a property manager. If you're in the market for a manager and you're interviewing them, it's a good idea to ask them some questions just so that you know kind of how long they've been in business and what key things you need to look out for. So one is, how many units do they manage? You want to know if they're a large established player or a small mom and pop manager. Do they do multifamily or only single families? How long they've been in business. If they've just started a few years ago, might not be the right one for you. You might not want to be the guinea pig that gives them their first property. Ask them if they also own their own rentals. If they're an owner operator and they know they also have rentals and they run a company, most likely they know what it is to be on the other side as an owner, so they can empathize with what you're going through as well. Another thing to ask is software. Right now, there's a lot of good technology out there for property managers, and you want to make sure that they're at the head of the curve and they're using technology, leasing technology, self-showing technology, accounting software, marketing software that puts your rentals, on Zillow, on Trulia, on all the rental websites, Facebook, so that you can get the maximum exposure. Some of the big names out there are Appfolio for property management software. There's Buildium. There's Rent Manager. There's a few other big players, but you want to make sure that they're using some sort of software so that they can generate the reports you need easily, and you're not waiting for them to fill out a spreadsheet to send you a report. You can ask them what their screening process is. How do they find new tenants for you? What criteria do they use? That can give you a good insight into how well they screen new tenants. Also, how long do they take to place a new tenant? Usually it should be within the 30-day mark to place a new tenant. If it's more than that, then something's not right. Usually, it's anywhere between 1 day to 30 days is average. And again, this depends on the market. Some markets like New York City, you can fill it the next day that it's vacant. Other markets may take longer. Another good question to ask is if they have the required license and insurance requirements for their state. Some states don't require any sort of licensing for property managers. However, some states do. So you have to make sure they have the required broker's license or a real estate salesperson's license if they're collecting rent on your behalf. Another good question is their employees. What's their structure? How many employees do they have? Do they do maintenance persons? Is that in-house or do they outsource maintenance to vendors? You want to ask how or after hours calls handled. Do they have an answering service? Will they be able to handle that 2 a.m. call when the plumbing leaks and the toilet is overflowing, and can they send someone out? How much will that cost? Things like that. Also, what their fee structure is, what are all the extra fees that you could possibly be exposed to, and also their references. What clients do they have now that you can contact to get feedback on their services? So these are just some of the questions you can ask to get a feel for what kind of business they're running. Okay. Inga, do you want to talk about selecting rentals?
Yes. So we usually recommend that you find your property manager first before you look for a rental, unless obviously you're planning to self-manage. But if you are planning to hire a property management company, you should have that kind of selected first before you look for a rental. That way, you can hit the ground running, and once you close, you already have somebody that you trust to manage your rental. So once you have your property manager, how do you actually find a good rental property? So you want to narrow down your market, and you would like to select an area where there's population growth and the economy is growing. That means lots of jobs, lots of different markets, and lots of different industry, because that will give you, less vacancies, and it'll make filling your apartments easier, and a larger selection of tenants that you can pick from to make sure that you're getting the best possible tenants. So then you also have to make a decision whether you want to focus on single family units or multifamily, and each one has pros and cons. So when you have a single family house, usually all the utilities are covered by the tenant themselves. So water, sewer, electricity, everything is usually covered for the tenant. Additionally, they usually will do their own landscaping, their own snow removal. So it's a little bit less day-to-day operation there. On the other hand, if you have a single family property and the tenant doesn't pay rent, now you have 100% loss of rent. So one way to mitigate that is obviously have many single family properties. That way, if one doesn't pay, you're still cash flowing. On the other hand, when you have multifamily properties, some of the pros of that is, again, if one tenant is not paying, you still have the other apartments to give you rent, so that yours should still be cash flowing, unless, of course, everyone stops paying, then you're kind of in a bad spot. Hopefully, if you have a good property manager, that doesn't happen. And but if you have a multifamily property, sometimes the property owner is responsible for certain utility bills. For example, usually water and sewer in multifamily properties is covered by the owner, because many times the water meter, there's only one water meter for the entire house. Also, usually landscaping, snow removal, those kinds of things, those are also an expense for the owner. So you have to take that into consideration when you're figuring out your expenses. Another benefit of multifamily is, even though, let's say you have multiple apartments, but you only have one roof. So if you have the roof leak, there's many apartments that cover that expense as opposed to only one. So you have to decide what you think is better for you. Of course, you can have some multifamily, some single family, but you have to be aware that each comes with its own pros and cons. When you're selecting your area, you also want to check the Truly a Crime map and stay away from horrible crime-infested areas would be our advice. One of the reasons for that is you want your tenants to feel safe. So the safer they are, the less vacancy you're going to have. Also, the maintenance men that you send there to your property, you want them to be safe as well. You don't want your handyman getting shot potentially as they, if they go to fix your property. I've heard of that happening. So make sure that you don't purchase properties in a very bad area in terms of crime. You also want to think about what's the class of tenant you want. There's A, B, C, and D in terms of the class of tenant. And obviously A, those kind of tenants are higher class properties. They're going to be more expensive properties in more expensive areas. And usually those kinds of properties have lower cash flow, but they're more stable. Versus as you go down the alphabet, you get to C and D. Usually cash on cash return for those properties could be higher, but those can be more volatile type of properties because usually those kind of tenants, they are living paycheck to paycheck. So if they lose their job, they don't have savings to kind of last them through until they get a new job. So the volatility can be more. They also tend to kind of stay shorter periods in the property. So you want to decide for yourself, do you want a more stable, lower cash flow, or you want a little bit more volatility, but potentially higher cash flow? So you have to figure out what your risk tolerance is. Whenever you are purchasing a property, obviously you want to analyze all the property income and expenses. Is the rent market value? Is there a value add in terms of the rent? And make sure that you understand all the expenses. As I said, everybody knows about insurance and property taxes, but there's other hidden expenses that you might not think about, especially with multifamily properties. The landscaping, the snow removal, the water and sewer, those can add up actually quickly. Also, you want to make sure that even if you decide to self-manage the property, you want to make sure that it still cash flows if you tack in the property management expense. And the reason for that is, even though you might be managing it today, but you never know what's going to happen tomorrow. Tomorrow, you might not want to manage anymore. You won't be able to manage anymore for whatever reason. And you don't want this property to be not cash flowing if you tack on the property management. So that's when you do your analysis, make sure that it still cash flows, even if you add in the property management. So now that you have selected your property, you want to put out the offers. What do they say? The good deals, you never know if they accept your offer or not. Just the more offers you make, the better chance that you will snag a deal. Once you have an accepted offer, you always want to make sure that you perform an inspection. You want to know what kind of repairs have been postponed by the previous owner. And usually you want to find out why they're selling, and if they're selling because this property is kind of falling apart on the inside. So sometimes that's, the owner doesn't want to deal with all the headaches of fixing things or updating the property, so they're kind of trying to push it off. So you need to make sure you understand what expenses are gonna come up once you close. And now that you have an accepted offer, you would like to finance your property, obviously. So there's many different ways how you can pay for your property. Obviously, you can pay cash, but as we have learned, that's not the best way to leverage your money. So financing your property, you can do it with a bank or with hard money. So typically banks will lend, and most people think that banks can get you the lowest rate, but actually most banks will not lend to an LLC. So you have to make sure that you find a bank that will actually lend into an LLC, because you don't want your property to be in your personal name. That increases your liability greatly and opens you up to lawsuits and people going after your personal assets. So you always want to have that extra layer of protection. So if you're deciding to borrow with a bank, you have to find a bank that will lend to an LLC. Additionally, banks usually have very stringent underwriting. You have to show your W-2. You have to show that you're marketable, that you have income besides the rental property, and you have to show your tax returns. So the bank wants to see that even if your property doesn't cash flow, they want to see that you'll be able to make their payment. On the other hand, you can finance your property with hard money, and not everybody knows, but hard money also has 30-year financing for rental properties. And the benefit of hard money is that they only look at the asset. They're only looking at the property, and is the property a good investment? So obviously they'll still run your background check and make sure that you're not a deadbeat and that you don't have, you haven't defaulted on many mortgages in the past, or you didn't commit fraud. But they usually will not look, they won't need a W-2, they won't look at your tax records. They only want to see, is the property a safe investment? Is it cash flowing? Does it make sense? So that's actually a wonderful way to leverage your money, because hard money also will fund as many properties as you have the down payment for. So while a bank, they look at your credit utilization. And actually this happened to us when we were first buying our rental properties and financing with a bank. After we bought the third one, the bank said, well, now your credit utilization is too high, so we're not going to give you any more loans, even though your properties are cash flowing. We don't care, because now we feel like you're too extended. So hard money is not going to do that. They will lend you as many properties as you have the down payment for. So that's a nice little ninja tip right there. There's also such a thing as portfolio loans. Maybe you've heard. Basically, it's where you can pull together multiple properties and just have one loan for multiple properties. And that usually can save you some money in the beginning, because you don't need to underwrite each loan separately. So in the beginning, it could save you money. However, one of the downfalls of a portfolio loan is the fact that if you want to sell off one of the properties out of the portfolio, then you have to restructure the entire loan, and that can come with some costly fees. So you have to think, you either have to liquidate your entire portfolio at one time, or be aware that you're going to have to pay sometimes quite hefty price to restructure your loan if you want to sell off only one of the properties out of the portfolio. If you already own your properties, a good way to maximize your wealth and leverage your finances is, of course, refinancing your rental. And we're actually in the process of doing that right now, because our market in Connecticut has appreciated nicely. And we're actually refinancing our properties into with a hard money loan. And you know who to go to for that. And once you refinance, that becomes an infinite return because your property appreciated. Now you pull out all the money that you put in originally as a down payment, but you still own your property. It still cash flows, but now there's no money out of pocket. So that's a great way. And you can take that money that you paid and you put it down towards more properties. So that's really a great way to grow your wealth. So if your property has appreciated, and it's a really great way to make sure that it's an infinite return property. So the next thing that I want to talk about is your rental income and expenses. You want to make sure that you are tracking all those things throughout the year very carefully. All your income and all your expenses, because once you get to tax time, if you have been diligent about these things, it'll make tax time much easier, as opposed to trying to rip your head out thinking, how much did I spend on that repair 6 months ago? And did I include everything that I can write off? So having a property manager will help you track those expenses. So that's another great way that you can utilize them. So now that we are in this time where there's COVID, it's been very interesting property managing, and there, especially with the eviction moratorium. Now, every state still has their own rules and their own individual ways that they're managing evictions. There is a nationwide eviction moratorium currently, but different states have certain exceptions. For example, in Connecticut, we have a few exceptions to the eviction moratorium. That if one of the exceptions is if the resident owes more than 6 months worth of rent, then you can still file for eviction. If the resident is physically threatening you or doing drugs or crime on your property, then you can also file for eviction. So you have to check what the rules are in your state, and if there are still, if there are some exceptions to this moratorium. One of the strategies that we have found that works is you are allowed to take your resident to small claims court for the rent that they owe you. So you're not evicting them, because that's not allowed, but you're suing them for the rent that they owe you. So that's actually a strategy that has been successful. It's not foolproof. They might just ignore your legal letters, but we've actually had sent out some legal notices saying that we're taking people to small claims, and a certain percentage of people that were paying nothing because they were trying to take advantage of the eviction moratorium got scared and said, oh, I'm going to get on a payment plan now. So we've actually had some success with that. So there's another ninja tip for you.
Thank you, Inga, for that. We're going to go through some real life stories that we've experienced as property managers over the last couple of years. An issue that we run into a bit is the whole medical marijuana use. Again, we manage quite a few multifamily properties, and now that, it's kind of on the fence whether each state is kind of different, but in Connecticut, even though I don't believe it's fully legal, if you have a medical certificate for use of prescribed by a doctor, you can smoke in your apartment, and that's legally for medical use. However, if you have a tenant who lives right above you and the smoke goes up and into their apartment, and then they start calling the property manager, hey, this tenant is smoking and it's bothering me. So now you're in a conundrum. What do? You can't legally tell them to stop because it's prescribed by their doctor, yet you have to kind of pacify the other resident that, hey, you know, we're doing all we can. They have a license, and kind of go back and forth. But what we found is that we for this particular case, we send out the air purifier ionizer to the tenant, and it kind of helps mitigate the smell and the effect of the smoke on if you're in that room. So that has helped us quite a bit. Stories on applicants. I mean, when you list an apartment, you'll get every Tom, Dick, and Harry trying to get in there. The ones that, you know, are legal, the ones that are not legal. One interesting one we had was the internet. We call them the internet content creators because that's what they said their job was. It was two girls. They applied for this apartment. We had a 2-bedroom apartment, and as usual, we go through their pay stubs, their background, and all of that. And they said they were internet content creators. That's what their job was. So we asked for their pay stubs like we usually do. And it had a name of a weird company on there. And, you know, just like, who is this company? So just doing some research, digging on the internet to find out, you know, which company this was. And we're asking them, and they were like very aloof about it, but, oh, you know, we create videos and photos and, you know, we post them online, and that's how we make money. And their bank accounts had, you know, 14,000 per month, 8,000 per month, really big deposits. So, you know, it was interesting. But when we did do the research and find out which company it was, turns out they were, this website is OnlyFans, which is a, you know, adult website. And that's how they made their money. But, you know, they went through, they met all the requirements for this apartment. So we put them in.
They're paying nicely, so no problems there.
Right. Another interesting applicant was an out-of-state one who, when we did our background checks, our typical background check didn't pull up anything. However, when our leasing agent Googled them, we found out they were part of a multi-million-dollar shoplifting ring. And I'm not sure why the typical background checks didn't pull that up, but, you know, we did some more research and found out that they were not a right fit for our apartments, for sure. Also, during this pandemic, we had a lot of people who were unemployed and were, you know, when they fill out our initial pre-screening form, they say, oh yeah, we make, you know, $3,000, you know, every 2 weeks. But turns out that's unemployment and pandemic unemployment income, which we do not accept. So we had to politely deny these. So you get all kinds of interesting applicants, and you really have to become some sort of a detective to really find out what's the background behind all your applicants. So it's actually very interesting.